Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Web3 podcast brought to you by PurpleMinds. I have today as a guest Stefano from Corporatio. Hello, Stefano. Welcome.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So we are going to talk about tokenization of assets, a new way of ownership. So let's start with the first question here. How would you describe the concept of asset tokenization?
I would say that when we're referring to tokenization, we refer to the idea of taking something, could really be anything, an asset, a liability, an item, basically whatever you can visualize, and wrap them into a token. So you're basically creating a representation of that same initial item that we took and put that in a digital way or in a form of a token. From there, you can apply different rules that might be required depending on the original item. For example, you're tokenizing a real estate property, a house, an apartment, and so on. That token might have specific rules following the laws of the location where the house is located. Vice versa, you might tokenize shares of a company. That's a classic security, and the rules that manage that item are obviously followed by corporate law in the country where the company is incorporated, and so on and so on. So tokenization basically allows you to semi-automate that process of applying rules, digitalizing an item, and eventually, in theory, making extremely easy to move that around, increasing liquidity and so on.
And can you talk specifically also what role the blockchain plays, and what's the benefit of using a blockchain in this sense?
So I think that there are two main parts of why blockchain is very important. The first one will be the fact that you have the usage of smart contracts. So as I was saying before, having those rules. Now, with the fact that you can use smart contracts, you can implement some of those rules in the token, in the structure, so that those rules are always there. Anytime that someone uses them, doesn't matter who the person is, doesn't matter which entity is involved in the verification or the management of those contracts, the rules will always be the same in every single case. The second part of why blockchain in general is pretty important on that is the removal of the middleman. And so, indeed, because the blockchain is a system that is basically self-governed, self-run, validators are validating and checking the transactions. The system is running 24/7. All the classic things of blockchain in general. That ensures that, for example, you don't need a third-party provider. It could be a bank, it could be the stock market. And that ensures, for example, that one, you don't need to rely on third-party individuals, which normally keeps prices low. But I think that the real potential here is the fact that it's open always. Your bank shut down at a specific time. You want to call the customer support on the weekend. Good luck on doing that. The NASDAQ, that you don't trade stocks on the weekend because obviously it closed down or in the night. When you're running things on the blockchain, it always run any single time in every single moment, which I think it's obviously should increase liquidity, should increase opportunities for individuals, and should enlarge the scale of how many people can access something like that. Because now you're not limited to a specific country or to a specific location. Anybody from anywhere in the world just need an internet connection and they could plug into something like this.
And specifically for opportunities that entrepreneurs and businesses might have within the tokenization of assets, where do you see those opportunities in general?
I think that that has been one of those topics that has been ongoing for many years. Already in the previous cycle, the ICO wave of 2017, people were talking about options and stuff like that. Last cycle, we started seeing people keep talking about that, and everybody's still waiting for the big moment of where like tokenization is really gonna come in place in the terms of like real world asset. Nothing at the large scale is currently available, but I think that like few of the items where I think the three macro that I'm seeing being very possible are real estate. And so, for example, you got projects like Realty in Detroit, and what they do is basically like they take properties, they tokenize them. Anybody can buy a piece of these properties, receive their rent every single week, and so on. That I think is a very common use case. You can apply not only to real estate itself, but could be to land, could be to commercial property, anything that in the sphere of real estate. The second area, which is basically where we at Corporatio focus on, will be tokenization of companies and entities. So private limited entities, LLCs, you name it, foundations as well, if in the case of like, for example, DAOs and so on. That works pretty well mostly because it's one of those wrapper that today is already being used for a lot of different assets. You can have a company that is an holding entity where you're putting IP rights. You can have a company that owns a house. You can have a company that owns a paint, for example. So it's pretty versatile as a structure. The third one, which I think is a little bit the easiest one, and easiest in air bracket, just because like it has less regulation, would be tangible assets. So things like, for example, collectibles. I'm thinking about like the Pokemon cards or the memorabilia, for example. Wine and whiskey bottles. Some of those items goes for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. But even things like, for example, painting. It's very common in the traditional industry to have like hanger ports in the airports where like paints are stored, and they're stored in those locations because they're for tax advantage and stuff like that. Now, if you tokenize those type of items and you allow people to buy pieces of that and like, little percentages and so on, you have the benefits of getting all the tax incentives and all that stuff. But you open up the market to things that currently are not possible. Because obviously, me or you most likely can't buy a Picasso if we want, but maybe a tiny little piece of that would be an option. I think that out of the three, the tangible assets is probably the one that has the most potential of going mainstream before anything else. Mostly because I'm thinking about like, you might have a Rolex, you might have a Patek Philippe. You tokenize that. Now someone can basically like go and buy that or take some money out of that. And in the event of the loan not being repaid, now that person can claim back that Rolex, which I think for the average Joe outside of the market is a little bit more easy to understand than, for example, collateralize an NFT. That I think is the first part where I can see like mainstream. Everything else like real estate, companies and so on, that I think is a little bit more complicated. It's going to take a little bit more time and probably will require financial institutions, banks, and like big conglomerate to come in and really trying to teach these type of things in reality.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the Rolex example. I think there is a recent company that is being active in this, right? It's providing loans for Rolexes, etc., through an NFT. So that's an interesting connection with the DeFi world and the NFT world, I guess, as well. Do you see other of these type of connections, for asset tokenization, whether it's in the metaverse, whether it's in DeFi or cryptocurrencies?
I think that, yeah, so the company that you're mentioning is the 4K protocol, and basically like what they do is exactly that. You send them your item, they store that for you, and they basically like issue the NFT. Then from there, you can basically like use that NFT to, go to whenever DeFi protocol you want to use to basically like use that as a collateral. I think that like, not yet on the blockchain side, but there is like this company called PWCC in the US that specialize in cards. any type of cards. Could be gaming cards like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and so on, but also like collectibles like baseball cards, basketball cards, and things like that. And basically what they do is very fascinating because like they have this vault where you got your own personal vault. So you have your own address in Oregon and you can send your items there. And then basically like you have the option of trading those items on their own platform. You can put that in auction, anybody can participate and so on. That obviously has the limitation as of now that is only on their platform. So you must remain in that ecosystem. But if you combine that on a large scale, basically like what 4K is doing with the Rolex, the watches, and so on, and now you could basically have like a vault where you could store basically all your collectibles. You got these NFTs, and you can start like placing that on, Uniswap, Sushi, LuxRare, DYDX, Blur, like you name it, any single possible platform that is available in the space. That would open up potentials by tons, both because you open up to more people, more individuals, because all these platforms have different users, but also because it becomes much easier to also allow other type of things. On PWCC, you can only store those assets or sell them. Being able to get a loan from those items is pretty powerful because you're starting transitioning an illiquid asset into a liquid asset, which it's something that is not very common or is not very easy to achieve without smart contracts, without blockchain technology, and so on. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of potential on going in those type of directions.
Yeah, that's definitely extremely interesting. And do you see any particular, challenges ahead for these type of opportunities when it comes to the tokenization?
I Yeah, I think that we have like an insane amount of challenges. Take the example that we're talking about, like with the vaults and so on. Take 4K, and they are basically having like your vault, your Rolex in the vault, and so on. You need to verify that that Rolex is real, and that requires experts to do that. Like I'm nowhere gonna be knowing if a watch is real or not. Like they can sell me like a $5 Patek Philippe, and I'm gonna be like, oh, that's like a perfect deal, obviously. Um, so that is a challenge on its own. You need companies that it's not a matter of just like storing itself. That's a challenge on its own, by the way. Imagine that you have a bottle of wine. Now you need to store that bottle of wine in a location that is dark, that where it's always at the same temperature, where the conditions are perfect. Otherwise, you spoil a bottle that might be worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So storage is a challenge. Number one. Transportation is the other challenge. You need to deliver an item, and maybe someone that is redeeming that item needs to receive that in a perfect condition. So that's number two. Number three is the validity. There is a lot of fakes going around, so the companies that are storing that type of items needs to be very, very good at understanding if something is real or not. Because if that doesn't happen, obviously you start having an issue there. Companies like PWCC, for example, have the classic certified items. So they use like PSA, which is a very famous certification and grading company for cards. If you are storing watches and so on, you probably want to work like with a validator, an authenticator, someone that is certified to do these type of things. Those are very important challenges, but are in the macro scale are doable as things to solve. The other set of tokenization that we're talking about, like the real estate, the companies, and so on, those ones have problems that are completely different because now you start going into money laundering, finance of terrorist activities, security laws. So if we're talking about a Rolex and I'm buying a Rolex secondhand, there is no KYC that is going to be done there. There is no MAL. Nobody's going to check like where my money are coming from and stuff like that. But if I'm buying a piece of a company, anybody's going to do KYC on me. Everybody's going to do like due diligence. They need to check who I am, my identity, and stuff like that. As of today, blockchain does have a massive limitation on that sense. because we're seeing solutions like a lot of the centralized exchanges that are now passing KYC. The last one I received the email from Qcoin. Qcoin is doing KYC and so on. So they need to know your identity. But if I'm using something Uniswap, for example, nobody knows my identity. There is no KYC there. That means that I need to put a very different role between the token, the functionalities of the token, and the underlying asset that is wrapped into that token, which means that I need to ensure that that token is not a security. However, if, for example, I'm putting a stock of a company and I'm putting that token to represent the ownership of that company, and now I add a layer in between. So I put something, for example, that it says that I'm not entitled to any voting right, any dividends, and so on, as long as I don't do the KYC to redeem the underlying asset. I'm still issuing an option at that point. That is still a financial product that is still regulated. So by laws, I would still need to do KYC. So we're currently in these very weird situations where I can't issue those type of products on the market. Um, or if I do, I need to get the identity in place of every single individual, which we're starting going into the direction of what Coinbase is doing with their base layer 2 solution. KYC will be required at a macro level on every single user that joined there. Now, that would allow to have all of these type of products, securities, real estate, anything basically relating to security regulation. But on the other side, there is a big fight, obviously, or the big argument that is being made that the blockchain should be anonymous. If you're doing KYC on everybody, now it's not anonymous anymore. So which one of the two sides is going to be the one winning? Are we going to be in a situations where like a lot of people are going to do KYC? Are we going to be in a situations where like a lot of companies are just going to bypass laws and take the risk and therefore doing something illegal? Are financial institutions and governments going to enforce those type of situations in a very aggressive way? We're seeing that the SEC right now is taking 3, 4, 5 years to enforce actions or like bringing in cases. Are they going to be faster in the future to do that? Are they going to be slower? Are they going to keep going in this way? There are, as of now, in general, like an insane amount of challenges for that. And which is basically bring back to the point of why I think that non-regulated assets, like for example, the bottle of wine, the bottle of whiskey, those type of use cases are going to be mainstream before because they're easier to crack. It's the workflow is much clearer there. The regulation is much more relaxed for those type of activities.
Right, right. Yeah, you covered a lot of things there, including kind of the regulatory challenges, which would have been my next question. But you know, regarding the verification of the assets that could be tokenized, there I can imagine maybe AI can play a role there when it's more more developed, more down the road, where they can actually recognize automatically if a Rolex is actually verified or not, and maybe it can be done for other projects as well. Do you think that could be an opportunity?
That's a tough one because so in theory, I don't think that we truly know the full potential of AI because like you see like all the articles of how at the moment AI is becoming like dumber and dumber like the more time is passing, like they're answering less difficult questions time by time. And even if you have like a best case scenario, so super AI, always perfect and all of that stuff, now you will need a very high quality image to verify the validity and authenticity of something. That will require, again, the company that received that item to be able to upload the images in a proper way. Which, if you have an expert in reality, would just be a matter of like probably you want to open the back and see if it's real or not. Same thing will go in the case of securities in general. Like I'm thinking about a lot of the countries and a lot of the regulations that don't have public information. AI is supposed to gather data that are available and then comes out with informations or outcomes that are obviously very good in general. If, for example, I have a company in a country that does not transfer data to the public, AI would not be able to know how I gather those money. So at that point, there will be like blockers in the verification process that will still require the intervention of a human being to check where I got those money, to show proof of that, and so on and so on. Could AI automate all of this? And so I'm just talking to AI all the time. Yes, that would be possible. But would it truly be an improvement in the terms of workflow? Because it's faster, I agree. AI will be able to obviously do the job of like, 10,000 people and never sleep and never stop and so on. But in terms of the steps that are required, I see them being exactly the same, to be honest.
Right, right. All right. Is there any other like exciting projects in this field that is worth mentioning here?
So 4K, as I mentioned, is one of those that I think has a very true potential, mostly because of the bringing in place of like the tangible assets and so on. Gnosis, I think, is going into a direction that is pretty interesting. So Gnosis bought XDAI, and XDAI was used as a chain a lot for assets in general. We are on Gnosis, Realties on Gnosis. There are quite a lot of companies that are going in that direction. Gnosis has also announced that now they're going to have like the cards for basically like swapping cryptos and so I think that they might go into a path where they might be able to like do something around KYC verification, and so having a true asset tokenization system in place. Other companies, there are some experiments here and there that has been done, like on the Hive blockchain. There was this project a few years ago that basically allowed you to buy a piece of a token, and this token was representing basically like a mining farm that was mining Bitcoin. You were owning a percentage of the farm, and every day they were distributing like the earning that was being done and so on. This is very similar in a sort of like what it's happening now with the liquidation process of Celsius. So Celsius is shutting down. They're going to return some of the money, but Celsius was also having a mining farm. So they're going to take those rings, they're going to create a new company, and they're going to give shares of the new company to all the creditors. That is not a pure tokenization itself. It's more like just a translation from one company to another. But you could, for example, bring that as a tokenized situations. There are people that have been tokenizing the claims from the bankruptcy of FTX. So you have that credit in theory because you had money when FTX went down, and now people are like collateralizing that and they're selling that. So if you're buying those type of NFTs, in theory, you are now getting the credit instead of the person that owned that at the beginning. Those are very challenging, realistically, because there is tons of KYC that is involved on these type of things, by the way. Selling a credit is a security, so there is quite a lot that needs to be checked in order to make that working. But I think that's insane. It's a very good use case, to be honest. A lot of people that are in need of liquidity can now, sell that ownership or that credit that they have and gather something immediately, 30, 40, 50%, whatever the market agrees on, and someone else is taking the risk for them. Those are all use cases that traditionally has always been like open to accredited investors alone. Now, unfortunately, we don't know yet how the law is going to play out on that. Like, is the US going to allow retail to go there? Or are they just like going to close that forever to only accredited investors? But the fact that the technology will now allow to have these type of things open to anybody, I think that it's incredible. There is another project in the Philippines. It's called Cropital. It's unfortunately open only to Filipino people, but what they allowed you to do that is to do loans on farmers. And so the farmers basically like take the money, use the funds obviously to like grow whatever food they normally do in the process, and then they return the money. So now you're basically having like this loan that you can basically like transfer around and so on. The entire concept of any form of traditional business as some sort of use cases that has been like digitalized at this stage. Some of them are still missing the tokenization piece. For example, one of the use cases that I truly want to see is the tokenization of farmland. We have tokenization of real estate, of commercial properties, of gold mines, diamond mines, like you name it. Somehow, nobody has done as of now the taking on a farmland, leasing that land to obviously a farmer and so on, and distribute the profit with other people. There are solutions in the US that are available only to accredited investors. Nobody has yet to do tokenization on that. Is there any real reason why that didn't happen? Not really, because the rules and regulations will be the same as like concept like realty, for example. You take the land, you put that into an LLC, and you tokenize the LLC. So it's one of the sectors that like has a lot of experiments. There are a lot of projects that are like working on a lot of different things, but I don't think we truly have those players fully in place. I would want to see a company focusing on the vaulting system rather than trying to do an all-in-one solution of everything. I don't think the companies should focus on, we're going to do the vaulting, we're doing the verification, we're doing the tokenization, we're doing the selling, we're doing the distributions, like all of that stuff. Focus just on one item, storage of wine bottles, for example, and then partner with other companies that are taking care of one piece alone. And now you start basically like having this ecosystem that covers things at 360. Once we get to that point, I think that that's going to be a pretty cool sector to be in, because that is going to be a mature one. It's going to be an entire sector that is ready to open doors to any possible individual. Right now, it's mostly for the geek, the first mover, the people that wants to experiment with these type of things, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, so you can imagine that there might be some like NFT moment in the sense that the technology is theoretically there, but it's not really mainstream at the moment. So there might be like a certain like section of the asset tokenization, like the ones that you mentioned, that all of a sudden will be picked up by whatever company influencer, and it will actually hit the mainstream.
I think so, mostly because take, for example, what we were saying about the 4K. Now, the 4K protocol. Let's say I've sent the Rolex there. They authenticate that and everything. Now, I need to pay a daily cost for the vault there. That's a reasonable price. It could be like $1, $1.50, or whatever thing it is. Now, I have my NFTs and I sell the NFT to someone else. In theory, I'm now transferring the lease to that NFT. And if the person doesn't sell it, like if the person doesn't pay that, then the NFT should be destroyed in theory, and the item should be delivered. However, that means that the NFT needs to have those rules in place. Because if the NFTs is just like a very simple ERC 721 with no special rules in the smart contract, now the issuer cannot redeem or destroy that NFT. So these little things from a technological point are very important and very essential, because if I don't pay, that NFT is still around, I redeem in the back end the item, now I can sell the NFT and I'm basically committing fraud, because in theory I'm selling an NFT that is backed by nothing, which is really not what I want in that case. So I think that the technology is potentially 70, 80% there. Like, these are rules that are fairly simple to put in place. The underlying side, I think that that's what is missing in general. It's one of those things where problems are not there yet. And traditionally, like when you want to check if a workflow is in place, you need to like hit that with as many problems as you can. Tough situations needs to be in place. Things like, for example, lawsuit, court case, see how a judge will react to these type of situations. Singapore court is a very good example. Like a couple of weeks ago, they declared that cryptos are considered properties. And that's very important because they're basically telling you that now property means that they're an asset. So in theory, if the court in Singapore is saying that cryptos are a property, that means that I could use that as a collateral for a loan, for example. Now, the question is the bank going to accept that or not? That's a completely different story. But the simple fact that a legal rule is being put in place can open up the doors to other stuff. So I think that technology is way more advanced at the back end at the moment. Not perfect, but the very like bitter side yet, or the area where still a lot of work needs to be done, is mostly like on the integration side between the real world and the token piece.
That's exciting. Well, thank you very much for sharing, Stefano. Really appreciate it. I think this is very interesting for our viewers and listeners. And thanks everybody for watching or listening, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care.